Now, setting up and running trail cameras can be very rewarding. You can get a lot of data on the deer herd in your area, but there are some ways that you can kind of screw this up in the early setup phases that will lead to less pictures taken, more batteries burned through, and a lot more headaches overall. In this video, we're going to talk about how to avoid the most common trail camera mistakes. Let's get started. Okay, so first and foremost, the number one mistake I see from trail camera setups is actually SD card issues. When I decided to pick up these Flex M cameras from SpyPoint, not a sponsored video, but I do have a video out reviewing this. I'll leave it linked in the cards and in the description. A lot of the negative reviews were talking about SD card problems. And that's the biggest issue when I see people leaving negative reviews about a product or having bad experiences with a trail camera is the SD card issues. You have to make sure, and the companies pretty much always specify this, that you're using the right class of SD card. In the case of this SpyPoint, it's a class 10 micro SD card. You will also need to format it. Formatting instructions are almost always on your camera, and you need to format your SD cards correctly. Those SD cards don't know how to store the data from the factory. You have to program them with the firmware that is on the camera itself. Most modern cell cams these days have like a native firmware update that you can just run by pushing a button on the face of the camera or across the app that comes with the camera. It's very simple, but it's something you absolutely cannot skip. If you do skip this step, you're going to have issues with photo transmission or photo saves, which basically defeats the whole point of running a camera in the first place. Once your firmware is correct and your SD cards are formatted, it's time to actually put the camera on the tree, and this is something that people screw up as well. Number one, there is the camera direction, as in cardinal directions. You don't necessarily want to point a camera due east or due west. If you point a camera due east or due west and the sun rises in front of that camera, number one, it can trip your motion sensor if it pops out behind a limb and like flashes it with a bunch of light. Number two, if something like a deer walks by and trips your motion sensor in that moment, it's going to have the sun blowing in behind it. It's going to blow out the whole image. It's just not going to look good. And you're going to lose a lot of detail on that animal, which is kind of the whole point of this. Same thing goes for due west as does for due east. With the sun setting as it drops down into frame, it can give you false triggers on your motion sensor, and it can destroy the image quality if an animal does trigger that motion sensor. So always point your cameras north or south if you can help it, or at least not due east or due west, especially on field edges where there's no trees or shrubbery to really block out the sun as it's rising or setting. Next up is camera mounting height. If you are mounting your camera straight against the tree like so without any cant, you need to mount it at waist level. When I first started setting up trail cameras, I definitely mounted a few at like chest or head height, and then I would have deer, if you can imagine a deer walking past me here, I'd have deer walking right underneath the line of sight of my camera, and even if they tripped the motion sensor, they wouldn't be captured by the image, and that was a huge problem. We want to be able to gauge them on how their bodies are built, so if they're really big and beefy, that typically means that they're an older deer. Skinny or smaller means that they're a younger deer. If you're only catching their heads in the bottom of the frame, you're not really getting all the information that you could. So I recommend, if you want to run these flat, running them at waist height. If you want to run them up higher, and maybe at head height or a little bit taller, or even if you're climbing them up a tree to get them away from people on the ground from stealing them, aim them up higher, maybe 8-10 feet up, and then wedge a stick to get it angled down like so. Now, speaking of line of sight, another issue I see is putting cameras right into a deer's face, and I'll show you right behind you here what an example of that might look like. Okay, so right here we have a scrape that's basically always torn up. Right now this area is flooded, so it's got quite a bit of water in here, but during the season, this is a very repeatable scrape location, and there's a tree right over here on the right that I could mount a camera on. Now, the problem with mounting a camera on this tree right behind me is that as they're moving through this area to work this scrape, if they're coming from this direction and they're working the scrape, that camera's right in their face, right? So if they're looking forward, the camera is directly within their line of travel. I like to offset a camera about 90 degrees to the side and about 20 feet away-ish for a deer moving through an area. If you believe that the red light on a camera, or the low glow, or whatever you want to call it, stresses out a deer, this is even more important for you. I'm kind of on the fence. I don't think it necessarily helps. So I try to avoid that issue wherever I can, and this is just still a human shape and something I don't want them seeing if I can help it. If you've got deer moving through an area where they're coming straight at your camera and sticking their nose into it every picture, you might not want to necessarily do that. Also, if the tree you're mounting the camera on is thinner than the camera itself, you're going to want to avoid that as well. You want very natural shapes going up to where you mount your camera so that this blends into the landscape as much as possible. So to solve this issue, there's a couple of trees just behind this one. You can kind of see on camera here. I would mount my camera on one of those trees and point it to the side so that as the deer are moving in to either work this scrape or moving out after working it, they're getting caught from the left side, broadside if you will, by that camera a little bit further away from the actual scrape itself. Okay, we're gonna set up a camera on this tree here. I am gonna orient this at about head height because I've got some pretty tall grass right here in front of me. I don't want that waving in front of the detection sensor and giving me false positives. So I'm gonna mount it about here and I'm gonna orient it in this direction. The direction of travel coming through here is like so. So we're at about 90 degrees relative to the direction of travel. So it won't be directly in their face and it'll be slightly above their line of sight. So we're gonna take our strap, run it through here and pop it on the tree. I would recommend using a security strap like a locking cable or something if you're setting up on public land. People suck and they will steal your things, so just try to avoid that. I'm out on private right now, so not too worried about it for this particular setup. But let's go ahead and get this guy set up real quick and we're gonna angle this slightly downward and then take a test photo. Jam a stick through the top there, level it out. I got this guy turning on now, so once this is powered up, I'll take a test photo to make sure I'm happy with that angle. Okay, and there's the test photo coming through on my camera and I'm really happy with that angle. Final note for you guys, batteries with these things are everything. The whole point of a trail camera is to not have to enter the field to learn about what's going on in the field. And if you're constantly coming out to refresh batteries, well, guess what? You're basically defeating the purpose of a trail camera. So buy high quality batteries or buy a lithium rechargeable battery pack if the company offers one. Good lithium AA's are an awesome option. You're gonna get more photos, you're gonna get more videos, you're gonna get a longer timeline of being effective in the woods with these cameras with the higher quality batteries that you buy, and you will save money in the long run if you just buy higher quality ones to begin with. So that's about it as far as trail cameras go. It's really not rocket science, but there are a few things that can throw off your game if you're not aware of what not to do when you're setting up a trail cam. Hopefully this has answered some of those questions for you. If you think I forgot anything or you have further questions, leave them down in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching as always, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye guys.